there is one curious individual who would like to know that how long can a resident remain out of the U.S.? And if one stays out the maximum time allowed, will this affect one gaining citizenship?
Okay. The answer is you have to use your common sense. Let's start with common sense answer. When you are a resident of the United States, or you're a permanent resident of the United States, what does that mean? Permanent resident means is I permanently reside in the United States. So what the government, U.S. government says is every time you enter the United States, they have to make an inquiry, and sometimes they ask, sometimes they don't, but they make an inquiry every time you enter the United States. Are you permanently residing in the United States, or are you permanently residing somewhere else? And what does permanently residing mean from a common sense standpoint? Permanently residing means is my 2 feet are in the United States more often than in another country. Because if my 2 feet are in another country more than here in the United States, then I'm permanently residing somewhere else. So now what's their rule of thumb? The rule of thumb in their inquiries is this. One, if the trip that you were outside of the United States is less than 6 months, then all else being equal. Now, they have the right to ask you anything you want, but generally speaking, their rule of thumb is less than 6 months trip outside the United States. They're not going to ask you much. They're going to assume that you are permanently living in the United States. If your trip is between 6 months and a year, the presumption is that you broke your permanent residence in the United States, but you can say, well, I did it because, my grandmother got sick and I had to take care of her stuff, or whatever the situation may be, but that you still have your apartment, your car, your job, and everything else here in the United States, and then usually they let you through. Usually. Okay? After more than a year, the presumption is that you absolutely have abandoned your permanent residence, and then you can have trouble at the airport. So if you don't want any trouble and no questioning whatsoever, don't stay out more than 6 months at a time. Now, how does this affect citizenship? It affects citizenship in this sense. There's 3 rules for citizenship. You have to be permanently living in the United States 30 out of the last 60 months, which means you are more often in the United States than outside of the United States. 30 out of 60 months is 2.5 out of the last 5 years. Okay, you also cannot have any trip more than 6 months in any 5-year period that you're using as your basis for your citizenship. So if you do take a trip more than 6 months, you have now broken that continuity for citizenship, and you got to start a new 5 years all over from scratch again. And finally, you have to be living in the state where you're filing 90 days before you file. Those are the rules for citizenship, and they kind of overlap. The permanent residence.
The rules for getting your citizenship.
Getting your citizenship.
Right. So the long and short for residents is if you're going to be staying out of the country for more than 6 months, you need to get that form.
The reentry. It's called something called the reentry permit,
which allows you to stay out of the country for up to 3 years.
Correct. Okay. Now they have just recently changed the rules for reentry permits. Okay, where in the past all you had to do was file it while you were in the United States. Okay, now they're making people take fingerprints associated with that reentry permit where they did not before. Okay. So when you file for that reentry permit, you're going to be in the United States for 2 or 3 weeks because you're going to need that time period to get fingerprinted, and then you can leave. Okay. Where before the reentry permit is you were here for a weekend, you stayed for a long weekend, you filed it and left. Now, to get that reentry permit, which allows you to stay out of the United States for 3 years, you're going to have to physically be here for a few weeks to file the paperwork, get the fingerprint done, and then take off.
Okay. Once again, folks, you're in tune to the Immigration Link.